Welcome to our second webinar for 2021. My name is Emily Hutchins, and I serve as Director of Development for Virginia Tech Engineering. I'm at home this evening, so I'll remove my mask now. Our speakers are in separate locations, practicing safe distancing, so they are also unmasked. Thank you all for joining us this evening to hear Christina Wick share her tips from the top as an incredible woman in engineering leadership. The ability to connect virtually with so many Hokies around the globe through this program series has been a true positive experience in contrast to the physical distancing of the pandemic. And it's been a real pleasure seeing engineering alumni take advantage of the programming that my colleagues continue to present. So we have just a couple housekeeping items before I turn the program over to our guest speakers. We are going to be monitoring the chat feature in YouTube, and we'll leave time at the end for Christina to answer your questions following the planned talk. Please submit your questions at any point during the program and we'll add it to the list. We promise to wrap up by 8 p.m. so you can get back to your regular evening activities. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a very special Hokie to continue our program this evening. Susan Hughes is our Interim Associate Vice President of Human Resources for Strategic Engagement here at Virginia Tech. She joined the HR team in 2017 as the division launched a large transformational process here at the university, and she's been a key player in implementing change. But Susan started her career as an environmental engineer, and she earned her bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Pittsburgh. And she worked as an engineer for over 2 decades. Susan has joined us this evening to share her story of supporting Virginia Tech engineering students.
Thank you, Emily. I think I get the next few minutes with you. Thank you for that introduction. And Emily and I haven't seen one another since we went to the Pitt Hokie game where Pitt lost miserably. So I did not pull out any of my Hail to Pitt memorabilia, but it was a really good game nonetheless. So thank you all for coming out and hearing what I know will be really good information from Christina Wick when I hand the baton to her. But I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about why I set up what is now known as the Future Alumni Scholarship Award. And I'm just a girl from Wilmerding, Pennsylvania, in fact. And I grew up with an alcoholic father and a paranoid schizophrenic mother that was institutionalized many times over. But I did find some solace and both recognition in academics. And so that allowed me to kind of get beyond some very tough seasons. And I was able to get a scholarship to go to college. And that's where I pursued the civil engineering degree. And at that time, long ago and far away, it was 1980 when I graduated in civil engineering from the University of Pittsburgh. And there was about 10% of that particular class in civil engineering that were women. And while I thought that was good, I did not recognize that there should be a lot more. I felt very comfortable surrounded by males because I was sandwiched between 2 brothers, and they can do a very good job of making you strong and not intimidated to be around males. So I was able to succeed in college and then working in environmental engineering and ending up in the utility industry. Again, very male dominated. But I was able to succeed and kind of moved up the ranks, if you will, and eventually moved in an executive level position over to Chief Human Resource Officer. So what I would say is engineers can end up anywhere, but what they do very well, I think, is solve problems. And one thing that I know is missing is a lot more women solving problems. And those young women that can enter into engineering, they are leaders, they are bright, they are not intimidated easily if they have some coaches and some others that look like them and know that they can be kind of following in their footsteps. And that's why I wanted to start what is the Future Alumni Scholarship Fund, to help young women that may not otherwise be able to pursue an engineering degree. And what I do know is engineers solve problems. And there's plenty of problems out there to solve, and we need more women involved in that problem solving. One of my little mantras is, if we had more women in leadership, it would make a positive and profound change in the world. And so I'm glad to say we have our first recipient, Andrea, who's a freshman this year at Virginia Tech. And I hope that many of you would consider giving, so we have plenty more recipients of the Future Alumni Engineering Award. Because again, we need more women solving problems, and engineers know how to solve problems. So I wanted to just let you know, you'll hear more about that, I think, in the subsequent information that is sent out to this group about how you can contribute. I hope you'll join me. And with that, I am really, really pleased to introduce Christina Wick. And she's going to tell us how we're doing today in terms of statistics and where women lie in the current landscape in engineering. So a little bit about, I'm going to cheat because I have to look at the notes here, a little bit about Christina. She's a graduate of the Department of Computer Science, and she graduated with her bachelor's in 1998 and quickly followed up with a master's in 1999. She started her career with AOL. Now, I've heard of that, but some of you may also have heard of Amazon. She's also worked at Amazon and Venmo. And before taking her current role as the Vice President of Engineering at Harry's, a men's grooming products company. See what I mean about women just ending up all kinds of places. But Christina is here to share her personal story as a woman leader in engineering. And some words of wisdom. I hope many of you students out there or young women can learn lots and lots, as well as the rest of us can, I'm sure, from some of the words of wisdom that Christina will be able to share with us tonight. And with that, I believe I'm going to mute and hand the baton off to Christina.
Thank you, Susan. Let me see if I can get this screen share going. So hopefully everybody can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can get chat going. Okay. Before we get started, I actually just wanted to wish everyone a happy Women's History Month. This past Monday was also International Women's Day. So hopefully this talk seems like an appropriate one for this month. Thank you for joining me tonight and giving me the opportunity to talk about being a woman in technology. So as Susan said, I thought I'd share a little bit about me. I graduated Virginia Tech in 1998 with my bachelor's and master's my bachelor's in computer science, my minors in mathematics and psychology. I actually started out as a double major in computer science and music, but the music part didn't last past my freshman year. I did the 5-year bachelor's and master's program, so I was able to get my master's in 99, and then I actually qualified for the PhD program where I'm all but dissertation. My area of interest has always been human-computer interaction. So what have I been doing since tech? Well, I worked at AOL for almost 14 years. When I had left, I'd gone from being a software engineer to a senior technical director. I was responsible for product design and engineering of over 50 mobile applications and websites. I, along with 2 engineers on my team, got to have the honor in bringing streaming radio to the iPhone for the very first time, which we won an Apple Design Award for. Also, through an app called MapQuest, brought free turn-by-turn directions for the first time to the iPhone as well. After that, I went to go work for Amazon. I spent my first year in the Amazon App Store group responsible for in-app purchasing. In my second year, I worked for AWS Mobile, where I built a team and launched a fully operational service at reInvent in 6 months' time. After that, I went to PayPal to run engineering for Venmo. That job expanded into running engineering, product, and design. And now I'm at Harry's, where I run the software engineering department, and I'm also responsible for our platform product and design. So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about some history, about women in computing, and some stats. I'll actually go back and forth between talking about women in general and women in tech. So hopefully I'll be a little bit clear about when I'm talking about which. So when I think about the role that women have played in the history of computing, it's been a prominent one. The very first programmer was a woman, Ada Lovelace. She worked on the analytical engine developed by Charles Babbage. Then there was Grace Hopper. Folks might recognize this name because of the conference that's held annually named after her. She actually helped develop the UNIVAC and was one of the architects for COBOL. She was also credited with the idea that code could actually be written like a real language is written. Then there's Sister Mary Kenneth Keller. She was the first woman to earn a PhD in computer science in 1965, and she helped develop the language BASIC. And then there's Joan Clarke. You often hear a lot about Alan Turing, but do you know about her? She was the only female on the team of 8 that was recruited to break the Enigma code. And she was also known for being one of the greatest code breakers in history. And then there's Jean Bartik. She was one of the first programmers of the ENIAC, the first all-digital computer. So how are women faring in general? Well, last year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing and protecting women's constitutional right to vote. That doesn't mean, though, that all women have been able to vote in this country for the past 100 years. It took women of color many years after that, and if I'm being honest, 100 years really isn't that long. Did you know that a woman wasn't allowed to have a credit card in her own name until 1974? That was 2 years before I was born. Or that until 1978, it wasn't illegal for an employer to discriminate against pregnant women or women in childbearing years. So what's going on in the education space? Well, first, women are more likely to be enrolled in college than men and are more likely to earn a diploma. As a matter of fact, 57% of bachelor's degrees are being awarded today to women. Yet we're going backwards in computer science. 18% of computer science graduates today are women, compared to 35% that graduated in the mid-'80s. And while 18%, like I said, are graduating computer science women, only 11% of working engineers are actually women. So given that, and what you probably already know about hiring in women, I think no one would be surprised to hear me say that when it comes to recruiting women in technology, we actually have a pipeline issue. So how are women in general doing in the workplace? Well, first, we aren't paid equally. According to data from the US Census Bureau, the average gender pay gap in the United States in 2018 showed that for every dollar a man made working full-time, a woman earned 81 cents. And in tech, women make 29% less than their male counterparts. The pay gap varies by ethnicity. So, for example, take a typical full-time, year-round employed Black female and assume she started work on January 1st in 2020. She would have finally earned August 13th of this year, 2021, what a similarly employed white male worker would have made over the course of 2020. So what a white man makes in all of 2020 will take a Black woman all of 2020 plus all the way through August 13th, 2021. Or for Hispanic women, it's worse. They wouldn't reach feature parity on pay until November 2nd. That's 307 extra days. And it varies by state as well. While most states have implemented laws against gender discrimination, and you would think that the 1964 Civil Rights Act that protects women at the federal level, that there wouldn't be as many disparities at the state level, but there are. In Wyoming, for instance, the gender pay gap is 30.9%. That's the biggest wage gap we have in the nation, with Louisiana following closely behind at 30.8%. California, on the other hand, they're doing a good job. They have the smallest pay gap. And it varies by age. You can see that the gap gets bigger as you get older. And while progress has been made toward pay parity between the sexes, the Institute for Women's Policy Research estimates that it won't be until 2059 that we actually reach parity. I think it's pretty safe to assume that folks here are also familiar with the concept of the glass ceiling. But the real issue is that the first rung of the ladder is broken for women. Men more than women are promoted into management roles. So when we look at the data, what do we see? We see roughly the same percentage of women and men entering the workforce. Yet, when we look at the percentage of roles held by men and women in management, there are disparities. For example, only 38% of entry-level management roles are held by women. Since men significantly outnumber women at the manager level, there are far fewer women to hire or promote into the senior manager position. So even as hiring and promotion rates increase for women at senior levels, women as a whole can never catch up. There are just simply too few women to advance. So what's going on with women in technology and in the industry there? Well, women make up 11% of working engineers, and 1/3 of women older than 35 are still in junior positions. We also have a massive retention issue. As a percentage of the total US workforce, there are fewer women in tech today than there were in 1984. And as if that wasn't bad enough, 50% of women who take a tech role drop it by the age of 35. COVID has made the situation even worse. Imagine a 2-income household with children. We already established that women tend to get underpaid compared to men. So if the kids need help, who do you think ends up sacrificing to work from home or to give up work altogether? And almost half of the tech-educated women with children leave their job. So research shows that females are still facing sexism in the workplace and unfriendliness to family planning and pregnancy. So what's the quality of our work like? GitHub, this was a really interesting study. They released data that said code provided by females was accepted 78.6% of the time, which is 4% more than code written by men. But that research also showed that simply identifying the gender of the programmer modified how those in charge saw the quality of the work. So what does that mean? Code written by women more frequently accepted over men, only if the gender of the programmer stays a secret. So what can we do? We can self-advocate. Remember, no one will be a bigger advocate for you and for your career than yourself. Managers will come and go. In my 20 years, I've had 22 managers, only 3 of which were women. Do your homework and don't be afraid to ask for things. The worst that can happen is that they can say no and that nothing happens. But if you don't ask, you're guaranteed that nothing will happen. Learn and be curious. Take the time to really learn and absorb everything you can. No one is ever done learning, especially leaders. Push yourself to pursue high-profile projects and opportunities sooner than you might otherwise, and take the time to create a strong foundation on which to build. Make good choices, surround yourself with smart people, and choose companies that care about diversity and inclusion. Remember, when it comes to interviewing, you get to choose your employer just as much as they get to choose you. Be a good listener, accept constructive feedback, and listen carefully because not all advice is good advice. And if you're giving advice, make it good. Don't let past negative experiences discourage you from seeking better feedback either. Remember, women are more likely than men to receive feedback based on negative stereotypes. For example, being told that we're too aggressive, or on the flip side, that we're too timid. Also, we are more likely than men to get vague feedback. So when that happens, ask for specific and actionable feedback and pointers. The worst advice I was ever given in my career was when I had a boss tell me once that I didn't talk enough in meetings. He said, from now on, I want you to make 2 statements at every meeting, even if it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, and ask 1 question, even if you already know the answer. Work hard to foster inclusive cultures. Remember, not all points of view are favorable, so create a safe space and place for everyone to speak. Support diverse candidates. Companies can do this through programs and initiatives. And lead by example. If you lead, others will follow. In the end, we need to do whatever we can to level the playing field. Try using scripts. This applies to those who see bias happening and those who are experiencing bias themselves. So what do I mean by scripts? Phrases like, can you repeat what you just said? Or that comment doesn't reflect the person I know you to be. Phrases like that can really make people stop and think about what they just said. Keep phrases like this and others in your tool belt and role play with others and friends so that you can plan ahead and practice how to push back. Get a mentor, be a mentor. Find an executive sponsor. So unlike mentors, executive sponsors can help by using their reputation to overcome implicit bias. They use their networks and make important introductions that women would not have otherwise had access to. Men have sponsors all the time, so should we. And male leaders out there, broaden your pool of potential candidates. People tend to naturally gravitate toward junior colleagues and similar interests. This means typically men like themselves. Sponsoring benefits you by retaining talent, creating trusted allies, and building future leaders. And most importantly, don't give up. I know this is all easy things to say, but in practice, it is really hard. I wanted to give up so many times in my career. I hope that by sticking it out, that I have helped make a difference, and that if my children choose a career in technology, I hope that I have helped make the industry just a little bit better. Remember, when you think about the number of hours you spend awake, we spend more time at work than we do with our own families. So most importantly, have fun. I actually wanted to spend the majority of the time taking questions and talking to folks and answering that. So I have actually, please scan this flow code. It's a way to reach out to me and connect. At this point, I will stop sharing and we can move to the Q&A section.
Okay, first question, Christina. Looking back, what is some advice you would give your freshman self?
That's a good question. So I think the first advice would be don't wait till the last minute to do the work, to do your assignments, and sleep. Sometimes, especially when you're working on a problem and you're working up against a deadline, you want to stay up late to just kind of work through it. I actually found, it took me a while to figure this out, but I found that if I just walked away or if I went to bed and got up early the next morning, like my head would be clear and I'd be able to see and attack the problem all over again.
When is the best time to apply for internships? During school or during breaks?
So I don't know if you're asking specifically about like the application process itself, or if you're actually talking about when to do internships. I would say do internships as many as you can, and do them over the breaks. Ideally, you want to spend your time in school really focused on school. If it's about the application process, the timing around internships, a lot of times those get figured out in the fall. And so you're going to end up applying for them during the school year. But then also, conversely, like if you establish a good relationship with the employer, you can repeat your internships, which would then help eliminate having to go through, the application process over and over again.
Okay. What does advocating for yourself look like? The writer wrote, Hispanic engineer here and struggling with this. Yeah,
so first off, I would say keep track of your accomplishments and what you're working on. I learned this late too, and wish somebody had told me this early in the career. Like keep a running document, and not just like what you did, but the impact that it had, and make sure that you're sharing that with your manager. Often, I find that engineers working for me won't share or don't really share a lot about what they're doing, or versus some engineers who will toot their horn all the time. I know it feels a little bit unnatural, but sharing with your manager and talking about what it is that you've been working on, and like I said, keeping that running document so that at the end of the year, when you have to write your end of year review, you have all that information. You're not trying to remember everything, and you're not suffering from recency bias either, as you recall like your great accomplishments. It's asking your manager to work with you actively on your career development. How do you get to the next level? What are the types of things you should be doing to grow? And what does success look like? And so it's really about, at your one-on-ones, making sure that you are asking those questions and that you are driving for that. Get a mentor, make connections. Whenever you have events like these that you can go to, get the contact information, make sure, find people on LinkedIn, connect with them that way. You can get help and advice on this topic itself, and how to be better about advocating for yourself.
What are some things to do to make relationships with male colleagues better?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's interesting because sometimes, like there are a lot of social stuff that happens that people tend to bond over, right? So drinks after work, which is actually difficult for females, especially ones with family, to be able to participate in. And so as an employer, or people out there who are managers, I try to have activities too that are inclusive inside the workday so that we can make sure that people stay connected. You could try pair programming with another male engineer on your team, or just really, trying to connect at that level. I think, one of the things as a woman that we tend to be better about than our male counterparts is being able to be empathetic and be able to read people, and understand like the things that motivate. So I would say try to connect with people, on a social and personal level, as well on a technical level at work.
How do you respond to a manager who is constantly touting to you how much they support diversity? It has made me feel like a diversity hire more than a team member in the past.
Have you shared that feedback with your manager? I think oftentimes, look, I find that, that I try to live by the philosophy of assume best intent. And so it's just, it's like when people are being assholes at work, I don't think people are waking up in the morning going, oh, how can I be an asshole at work today? Right. And so I bet your manager is not really aware of how it's uncomfortable it's making you and probably others feel. And so I would actually, I would have that conversation with him or her and say that the way that they talk about it actually diminishes, your feeling or your position on the team. And I'd be candid and share that feedback with them.
What are some approaches you use in speaking in a meeting, especially one filled with men, as a woman?
Yeah, so typically my meetings are mostly men. I try to go off the social cues of the team and the dynamics of the room. I told you I got that advice that I, don't speak up enough in meetings. But it's really, for me, it's like if I have something to say, I'll say it. And so I think firstly, making sure that you do say, if you do talk, if you do have something to say. A lot of times I find that women will stay quiet and maybe they'll say something after the meeting to me and I'll be like, why didn't you say that? And so as a good manager or leader, or if you're a tech lead, the other thing you can do is kind of create space for people. It's a little bit harder right now with COVID when we're all remote, but when you're in a room with people, you can almost see like that anticipation of somebody trying to talk and get a word in edgewise. And so I'll say, Haley, like, is there something, is there something you want to share with us? Or what are your thoughts on this? And so creating that space for others. I also think that, don't be afraid to interrupt, right? And so I say that, and we're trying to become a culture and I think it's getting better in the workforce where men are trying to do or be more aware of not interrupting women, but it happens. And so don't be the only person in the room, especially if that's like the social norm too, of being the only one that doesn't. And so interrupt and say, look, I think everybody's talking on top of each other, and we would be better off taking turns speaking, or it's making it really hard for some of us to get a word in edgewise. So if you don't want to just kind of feed into that culture of creating a culture where you interrupt, do something to call it out so that you could start changing the norms, and maybe even establish, like we do this on teams where we establish like working norms where we'll get together as a team and say, okay, what do we want our norms to be in technical conversations? What do we want our norms to look like in staff meetings and things like that, so that we can establish and work on them as a group? And then that way, everybody feels like they're a part of that, and it'll be top of mind when they're having these types of interactions.
Okay, this question is, how do you recommend getting an executive sponsor?
That is a difficult one, and it's not always easy. But again, it's one of those things where it doesn't feel, I'll tell you, it doesn't always feel natural to just reach out and ask. But if you don't ask, you're definitely never going to get, you're never going to get that relationship. And so it was interesting at Amazon. Amazon has they have a mentorship program. And I remember when I joined for the first time, the VP of my group told me to go pick out a mentor. And they had this website with like a list of people who volunteer as mentors and all these different groups. And honestly, like I'm used to having those relationships develop more inorganically. And so I was a little bit overwhelmed by this process. And so I went to him and I said, hey, I don't even know where to begin. How do I pick a mentor? And so he asked me, what is it that you want to learn? Like, what is it that you're trying to figure out? And so I had three things. And one of the three things I told him that I was interested in learning was, when I went from a first line manager to a director, I had difficulty delegating and letting go of the fact that I couldn't know everything that was going on. So as I grow more senior, like I want to try and figure out, what's the next thing that I'm going to have as I transition to the next level? Like, what's the next thing that I'm going to have a difficult time with? And so he said, okay, well, for that situation, you want to go find somebody who's actually been promoted really quickly throughout their career, because if they've done it slowly, they probably won't remember the pain points, right? But if they've done it quickly, if they've jumped through a couple of promotions really fast, and they're going to remember those pain points, and it'll be more top of mind. And so he taught me how to look at, first, setting your goals in what you want to do, and then trying to find people in your network, or connect through events like this or other types of speaking events or things like that. Especially nowadays with COVID going on, there's a lot of these activities going on the internet that you can hop into virtually and make those connections.
Okay, so what are some things that women can do, like making jokes about themselves?
So I'm not sure I fully answer or get the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So maybe whoever wrote that can give a further explanation, and we can skip to the next question.
Okay, that sounds good.
How can you effectively and appropriately educate male peers and colleagues to prevent microaggressions and subconscious offensive comments?
Yeah, so we do, you're seeing a lot more training happening and popping up. HR departments are actually, across companies, are doing allyship training, trying to do some more of these sessions to drive awareness. Again, I'd mentioned those things about scripts. Like, there are actually, like, if you can call it out or have some key phrases that you use to be able to kind of point out that behavior. I also find it effective to kind of pull people aside one-on-one afterwards to talk about, I phrase it in kind of a framework. And so I start with, stating like the facts of the situation, right? So we were in this meeting and you said X, Y, and Z. And then talking about, well, how did that make me feel? When you said that, it made me feel like this, right? So separating the separating your emotion from the actual disputable facts, right? So separating those two out so that they don't get conflated together, right? And then ask, say, make an ask, what I would love is for you to work with me together to come up with a way on how like we can communicate better so that we don't end up in a situation like this. And so, I think a lot of times it's unconscious it's called unconscious bias for a reason, right? People don't always realize that they're doing it. I'd also develop a good relationship with your manager. This is part of their job, is to help coach this out of people. And so if you don't feel comfortable giving that feedback directly to a coworker, then your manager should be able to help you provide in the moment feedback to people. And also it'll drive awareness to them so that they can see it and that pattern of behavior happen, and then be able to point that out more and more often, not just the one isolated incident that you were a part of.
Going back to the previous question, what they meant was, what can women do to lighten up the environment in a meeting with male colleagues who are aggressive?
So I don't know that, I mean, you can try telling jokes. I don't know. It depends on what, like where that aggression is stemming from. I'll tell you, I had an interview once where I ended up getting the job. I walked out there at the end of the day and I was like, there's no way I got that job. And because one of the interviews, the guy that was interviewing me and I got into an argument, and he started yelling at me, actually, and he was really aggressive in the interview. And at one point I found myself saying, hey, like, hold on a second. I was like, why are you so upset? Like, we were talking about a hypothetical situation here and I'm giving a hypothetical answer. Like, there's no reason to, for you to come at me this strongly. And so I would call it out. I mean, I know that's easier said than done. And it certainly wasn't something that I was able to do early on in my career. But you'd be surprised at how effective it is.
Do you have any advice on how to be in your authentic voice while also facing the female stereotypes?
I would just say embrace it, right? Okay, the other day I was in a really difficult conversation, right, in a meeting. I mean, it was a one-on-one meeting and I cried, right? Like, I hate that. I hate that more than anything, right? Like, I feel like it shows weakness. But I'll also tell you this as a manager, right? And in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I've had men cry in my office too. And so we're not the only ones who cry at work, right? And so it's okay, like, own it, right? Like, it's because we care, right? And there's nothing wrong that about caring, right? So if you have confidence in who you are and just really just stay true to your authentic self, then yeah, there are female stereotypes and it is hard, right? And the more that we can do to stay in our careers, the longer that we can stay in, the more women that rise to higher level positions, right? The more balance that we'll be able to create. And you just have, I said, my advice is to stick it out and just have faith in yourself, but also know, like, if you're working in an environment that you're not happy, again, I go back to that. We spend more time awake at work than we do with our own families. Find another company, find another job. Like, we are employable. Like, software engineers, like, they are being hired. I am, people are getting stolen all the time. I am getting LinkedIn requests all the time. Like, we are a hot commodity. So you don't have to stay in an environment where you're unhappy. That's why I say it's important too. When you're interviewing, make sure you interview the company, not just the company interviewing you.
My 11-year-old daughter is very science and math centric, but I hear many drop out of STEM in middle school. Any thoughts and suggestions to keep them interested?
Oh, that's a tough one. Find somebody else other than mom or dad to recommend it. I don't know. I think sometimes I find that, you know, suggesting something as the parent, just being the sheer parent, like discredits like the suggestion. Um, I, you know, encourage it, engage, find activities or things to be able to keep like developing and growing and fostering that. Um, whether it's my kids really into Roblox and being able to like build out games and systems there. And so, I would always ask them questions and show interest in what they're doing and, offer suggestions or just encourage them. And I tried to, find summer programs or things like that to kind of keep them interested. There's programs like Girls who Code, and you can connect through at the school to see what types of programs and activities there are there to try and get people engaged that way. It is hard as a parent, I would say, but it's really important because a lot of them do drop out.
How have you navigated in your career while also balancing the expectations and needs of your family and personal life?
Yeah. So first, I would say that I was fortunate when I was working at AOL that we had an on-site daycare. I don't know if I would have been able to like successfully have 3 children and have a career if it wasn't for such a close proximity for me to be able to have my children in school nearby while I was working and having that additional support. That said, one of the things that's really important is for you to set boundaries. Like, I didn't do a great job of this. And I would even say too that when I look back at some of the choices that I made in my career and some of the things that I've done, like I've actually, and I have honest conversations with my children about this. I have left my children at times feeling like work was more important than them. And that is by far like not the case at all. And so have an open relationship with your children, that open line of communication, create boundaries, make sure you are setting aside a time to be present, right? It's okay to like not be on 24/7, right? Like tell your boss that you know what, you'll get to that after the children go to bed, or that, you can't get to it tonight because you're going to your daughter's volleyball game. They have lives too, and they'll get it. You just need to communicate to them and set those boundaries.
Earlier, you recommended choosing companies that care about diversity and inclusion. What did you look for or ask about when searching for a company to determine if they are genuinely invested?
So I asked them how many women held executive leadership positions. So at Harry's, it's about 35%. So, so the VP of engineering, female, but it was also the head of distribution was female. And actually the GM for Harry's, the men's shaving brand, is a woman. And so, so when I looked at the VP leadership team, and look, 35% is not 50%, right? Like that's where we need to get to, is where we have, where the leadership teams, like at all levels, look like the gender diversity and the race diversity that we have in this country, and representation there. I asked about like what percentage were people of color, and looked at those stats as well. And what programs do they have put in place? Do they have employee resource groups? Do they have executive sponsors? Do they have, somebody who is head of D&I? What type of training do they offer? There are questions, questions like that. And a lot of times too, you can ask the recruiter ahead of time before you even get into the interview to provide you with materials and that they have, prepared from an HR perspective around their diversity and inclusion programs. One of the things that I loved about Harry's was they had talked about how they had an apprenticeship program. And so what they did was they offered the ability, well, first off, the developers actually helped teach some classes to other people at the company who are interested in software development. And then they made opportunities for people within the customer support team, for example, under focused on diversity, to do an apprenticeship and actually train up to become a software engineer. And so, they ran that kind of, they had that kind of inherent kind of natural relationship happen because they foster and it's really important to them to have, to grow and develop people, especially into other careers. And then last year we ran like an official program where we opened it up for people to apply, and we took 2 customer support agents who then came into the program. They had done some boot camp or some training on the side, but we also gave them additional funding to be able to grow in their career in their training as well, and then put them through this program. So programs like that, like asking the employers what types of things do they do, like we partner with groups like Pursuit in New York City, or which really is focused on getting diverse candidates in across different socioeconomic classes. It's what do they do to give back to the community? Those types of questions. And like I said, you can ask the recruiter up front. Ask them to send you materials. Ask questions like that during the interview process. And those are the types of things that you want to hear.
Would you change anything about your career path? And what are some of your favorite things about the positions you've held?
Would I change anything about my career path? So one of the craziest things I did was when I worked for Amazon, I did a bi-coastal commute. So I actually live in Northern Virginia and pretty much I was actually born in Seoul, South Korea. I lived there 1 year. The rest of my life I've spent in Virginia. When I got that job at Amazon, my kids were fairly young. I actually made a list of executives that I knew who did a bi-coastal commute. And I came up with 6 names. They're all men. And I thought to myself, okay, well, if a man can do this, like a woman should be able to too. And so I talked to my children about it, and I set up and I said, okay, I'm going to try this for 2 years and see how that works. And, I'd have a check-in with my children at 1 year mark. And we would talk about like how it was working, if it was working or not, and how we would handle that. It was really tough and it really impacted my relationship with some of my children. And in hindsight, I do ask myself, like, was that worth it? And so if there's anything that I would say that I would do different, like while that was a really valuable and amazing experience, I don't know if it was, at the expense of some of the feelings and challenges that we had to go through as a family. When I think about some of the fun or exciting times in my career, so I got the opportunity to take over the Mac team at AOL. And I actually asked if I had a choice because that team typically got laid off, and they said no. And so I was like, okay, looks like I'm managing the Mac team. And I was charged with rebuilding and helping rebuild that relationship with Apple. And that was a really exciting time because it was through that relationship building that my team got to be on stage with Steve Jobs during the iPhone SDK announcement. So my team went from overnight being the Mac team to the iOS team. We got pre-release access to iPads before anybody else, before they came out, before people knew about them. I remember there's some pretty crazy times having that device locked up in a room and only 6 people at the company could know about it. And we had to work on it in this little tiny room that had no windows, and then, the cleaning crew couldn't get access to. There was actually doing some of the most fun times is like going to conferences and running booths with my team, or just building really cool products or solving for me, it's solving customers' problems, not the problems that they know they have, but the ones that they don't even realize that they have. So those are some of the fun times that I've had in my career.
Christina, I believe that is our last question. This has been incredibly inspiring. And I know for me, it doesn't matter what industry you work in. Your advice is relevant to all of us. So thank you. Any final thoughts from Christina?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a tough journey, and but it's a really rewarding one. And so I would say stick it out. I'm actually gonna let me share that code again for folks, because I am highly encouraging you to reach out and um, connect with me on LinkedIn. Actually, if you go to my Flow page, you'll be able to send me email directly. Like I said, just put yourself out there, make the connections, talk to people, leverage the Virginia Tech Alumni Network. Leverage if you didn't go to Virginia Tech, leverage your college network. Leverage there's all sorts of things going up. Look in the meetup communities, things like that. Find like-minded folks, and really know that you're not alone. I often get asked about imposter syndrome and when does it go away. I'll let you know when it goes away for me. So, we're not the only ones that are feeling that way too. There are a lot of guys too that suffer from imposter syndrome as well. So you're not alone. Be vulnerable. And I know that means it puts you at risk of taking chances and getting hurt. But the rewards too are just so great when you do find other people that you can connect with that are like-minded. So thank you so much for letting me talk with you guys tonight. And like I said, connect with me and send me any questions that you might have, or and let's continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Christina and Susan, for sharing your experiences with all of us on this. And thank you for joining us live. And stay tuned for more great programming like this. My colleagues are working on a great presentation from some of our graduating students on their senior design projects, so stay tuned for that. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And Robin Stewart is always available to help get you to the right place if she doesn't have the information on hand. Her contact information is posted in the YouTube chat. Thanks again, and I hope you and your families continue to stay safe and healthy. And we look forward to reconnecting throughout 2021.